Sometimes the ones who knock the loudest are the ones you never hear at all. The wind that night moved like something alive, brushing through the broken pines at the edge of town, carrying the scent of cold iron and distant rain across the empty stretch of land where Caleb Mercer had set up his small canvas shelter just off Highway 12, where headlights passed but never stopped, and people forgot to look. But Rex never forgot to listen. The 6-year-old German shepherd sat upright near the entrance, ears high, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight, as if the night itself had whispered his name. Caleb noticed the shift immediately, not because he heard anything, but because Rex didn't growl without reason. Not anymore. Not after the years they'd spent learning how silence could mean danger or something deeper, something waiting. Caleb reached out, resting a steady hand on the dog's neck, feeling the tension beneath the fur, the quiet vibration of instinct that had once saved lives in places far from here. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his voice carried more curiosity than comfort. The fire crackled low, casting thin shadows that stretched and bent across the damp ground. And for a moment, there was nothing, no footsteps, no voice, no sign that anyone was near, just the slow breathing of the wind through the trees. But Rex didn't move, his gaze locked forward, unwavering, as if someone stood just beyond what human eyes could see. Then, without warning, the shape appeared, not stepping into the light, but forming within it, like fog, deciding to become a man, an older figure, thin, shoulders slightly bent, clothes damp but untouched by the mud that covered the earth around him. And Caleb's first instinct wasn't fear, it was something quieter, something that felt almost like recognition. Though he was certain he had never seen this man before, the stranger didn't speak right away. His eyes moved slowly from Caleb to Rex, and when he did finally speak, his voice was soft, steady, and carried the weight of someone who had waited a long time to be heard. "He knew I was coming," he said, nodding gently toward the dog. Caleb blinked, caught off guard not by the words, but by the calm certainty behind them. Rex let out a low breath, not a warning, not a threat, just an acknowledgement. And that was enough. Caleb shifted slightly, reaching for the old metal cup beside the fire, pouring what little warm water he had left, and without asking a single question, he slid it across the ground toward the stranger. "You can sit," he said simply, his voice steady. "Because some habits never leave a man, not the ones built from years of choosing kindness when the world offered none." The stranger stepped closer, slow and deliberate, and as he lowered himself near the fire, the flames flickered higher for a brief second, as if greeting him. And in that quiet moment, with the wind softening and the night holding its breath, Caleb didn't know it yet, but something had already begun, something that would follow him far beyond this roadside shelter, into a place no map had marked for years, a place that didn't forget who chose to open the door when no one else would. And beside him, Rex finally lay down, eyes still watching, as if the first piece of a story had just fallen into place. The old man did not rush to drink the water. Instead, he held the cup in both hands as if feeling its warmth meant more than tasting it. His fingers thin but steady, and when he finally lifted it to his lips, he closed his eyes for a brief second, like someone remembering something long forgotten. Caleb watched quietly from across the fire, the glow reflecting off the worn lines of his face, a face shaped by years of carrying more silence than words. And though questions moved through his mind, he let them pass, because some nights were not meant for asking, only for listening. Rex shifted slightly, but did not break his gaze, his amber eyes tracking every movement the stranger made, not with fear, but with a kind of awareness that felt deeper, older, as if he recognized a pattern Caleb could not yet see. The wind softened outside, the restless branches settling into a low whisper, and the world beyond the small circle of firelight seemed to pull back, giving space to the quiet between. "Three unlikely souls. You have been on the road a long time," the old man said at last, his voice carrying no judgment, only a gentle certainty that made the words feel less like a question and more like a memory spoken aloud. Caleb let out a slow breath, his hands resting loosely against his knees. "Long enough," he replied, his voice calm, neither defensive nor open, just honest in the way tired men often are. The old man nodded slightly, as if that answer had confirmed something he already knew. And for a while, they sat in silence again, the fire shifting, a soft crack echoing as one of the smaller branches gave way to ash. Rex lowered his head but kept his ears alert, listening to something beyond the rhythm of the flames. Then the old man spoke again, his gaze drifting toward the dark tree line. "There is a place," he said slowly. "A valley hidden where the road forgets to go. Most people pass it without ever knowing it is there, but it remembers them all the same." Caleb glanced up, not fully turning, but enough to show he was listening now. Something in the man's tone carried weight, not urgency, but meaning, the kind that settles quietly before revealing itself. "What kind of place?" Caleb asked, his voice low. The old man smiled faintly, though it did not quite reach his eyes. "The kind that waits," he said, and the words lingered in the air like the last note of a song that no one wanted to end. Rex lifted his head again, a soft rumble building in his chest. Not a warning, but something closer to recognition. He stood and took a few slow steps toward the edge of the shelter, nose twitching, then turned back toward Caleb, as if asking him to notice what he could not yet see. The old man followed the dog's movement with quiet interest. "He feels it too," he murmured, almost to himself. Caleb frowned slightly, the lines in his brow tightening just enough to show the shift from curiosity to something deeper. But still, he did not press. Instead, he reached for his pack and pulled out a folded blanket, worn but clean. Placing it beside the fire, "You can rest here," he said simply. The old man looked at the blanket for a moment before lowering himself onto it, his movements slow but deliberate, as if each action mattered in a way Caleb could not yet understand. The fire burned lower, the night growing colder as the hours stretched quietly forward, and somewhere between the sound of Rex's steady breathing and the soft rhythm of the wind, Caleb felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear, not hope, but something in between, something that felt like the beginning of a story he had not chosen, but somehow had already stepped into. The fire had burned down to a bed of quiet embers by the time the night reached its deepest hour, and the cold settled in like a slow breath across the land, pressing gently against the thin canvas walls of Caleb's shelter. Yet inside, something felt different, not warmer, but steadier, as if the silence itself had changed shape. Caleb sat awake longer than usual, his back resting against his pack, eyes half closed but never fully asleep, the kind of rest that comes to men who have learned not to trust the dark completely. Across from him, the old man lay still beneath the blanket, his breathing soft and even, though there was something about the way he rested that did not quite match the weight of the world around him. As if he belonged to a different rhythm entirely, Rex remained alert, not pacing, not tense, but watching, always watching, his gaze shifting between the man and the space just beyond him, like there was something else layered beneath what Caleb could see. And sometime past midnight, the dog rose without a sound, his movements slow and deliberate, stepping toward the far corner of the shelter where the ground was uneven and packed hard from weeks of use. He lowered his head, nose brushing the surface, inhaling deeply, then paused, his ears tilting forward as if catching a signal carried through the earth itself. Caleb opened his eyes immediately, his instincts responding before his thoughts did. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his voice low but steady. Rex did not bark. Instead, he pressed one paw gently against the ground, then another, scraping lightly at the surface, not frantic, not digging, but uncovering, like he already knew exactly where to touch. Caleb shifted forward, watching closely now, the faint sound of claw against dirt breaking the stillness in small, careful strokes. The old man did not stir, or perhaps he chose not to, and within moments, Rex uncovered the edge of something hidden just beneath the thin layer of earth, a dull shape catching the faint glow of the dying fire. Caleb reached out slowly, brushing the dirt away with his fingers, revealing a small metal object, cold and worn, its surface marked by time but not forgotten, a key, old, heavy for its size, the kind that belonged to something built to last. Caleb turned it in his hand, the metal catching what little light remained, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow around that single object, like everything before had been leading quietly to this point. He glanced up toward the old man, expecting some reaction, some explanation, But the man remained still, his face calm, almost peaceful, as if he had already given what he came to give. Rex stepped back slightly, his posture relaxing just enough to show that whatever he had sensed had now settled. But his eyes stayed fixed on Caleb, watching, waiting. The wind outside shifted again, softer now, carrying a faint sound from the distant road, a car passing without slowing. Without knowing, Caleb closed his fingers around the key, feeling its weight, not just in his hand, but somewhere deeper, a quiet pull, subtle but undeniable, like the beginning of a path he had not planned to follow. And in that still moment, with the embers fading and the night holding its breath, Caleb understood something without needing words, that some doors do not open when you find them, but when something finds you first. The first light of morning did not arrive all at once. It slipped quietly through the trees in thin silver lines, brushing against the canvas of the shelter and settling over the ground like a breath that had traveled a long way to get there. Caleb woke not to sound, but to stillness, the kind that feels different when something has changed, his hand still wrapped loosely around the cold metal key, as if even in sleep he had not fully let it go. Rex was already awake, sitting at the entrance, his silhouette framed against the pale horizon, ears forward, body calm, but attentive, watching the world as it slowly returned. Caleb pushed himself up, rubbing the stiffness from his shoulders, the familiar ache of the road greeting him like an old companion. And for a moment, everything seemed as it had been, the fire reduced to ash, the air cool, the distant road humming faintly with early traffic. But then he looked across the shelter, and the space where the old man had rested was empty, not disturbed, not hurried, just empty, the blanket folded neatly as if it had never been used. Caleb frowned slightly, scanning the ground, expecting to see footprints leading away, some sign of departure, but the dirt remained smooth, untouched, as if no one had stepped there at all. Rex turned his head slowly toward him, their eyes meeting in a quiet exchange that needed no words. Something had happened, and neither of them could explain it. Caleb stood, stepping out into the open air, the morning cold sharper now, biting lightly at his face. He walked a slow circle around the shelter, boots pressing into the damp earth, searching, listening. But the world offered nothing back, only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a passing truck. No figure on the road, no shape between the trees, just absence, complete and undeniable. He exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in acceptance, because some things do not leave behind answers, only direction. Rex moved toward the spot where the man had first appeared the night before, nose low, tracing something invisible along the ground. Then he stopped, looking up toward the north, his body still, focused. Caleb followed his gaze. The tree line stretched wide and quiet. Nothing remarkable, nothing calling. And yet something in the way Rex stood made it clear there was more beyond what could be seen. Caleb looked down at the key in his hand, turning it once more, noticing now the faint engraving along its edge, worn but still visible if you knew to look, a single letter, carved deep into the metal, an M, simple, deliberate. And suddenly the memory of the old man's words returned, not loudly, but like an echo carried on the wind, the kind that lingers longer than expected, a valley that waits. Caleb slipped the key into his jacket pocket, feeling its weight settle close to his chest, not heavy, but certain, like a decision that had already been made somewhere deeper than thought. He packed his things with quiet efficiency, folding the canvas, tying down his gear, every movement practiced, every action steady. But beneath it all, something had shifted, not urgency, not fear, but a pull, subtle and persistent. Like the road itself had changed direction without asking him. Rex circled once before stopping near the edge of the clearing, glancing back as if to ask if Caleb was ready. And after a brief moment, Caleb nodded, stepping forward beside him, leaving behind the place that had offered shelter for so many nights. But this time, it felt different, because he was not just walking away, he was being led somewhere, somewhere quiet, somewhere hidden, somewhere that had already begun to remember him. The road north did not look like much at first, just a narrow stretch of cracked asphalt that faded into gravel after a few miles. The kind of road people passed without noticing, the kind that did not appear on most maps unless you were looking for something that had already been forgotten. Caleb walked steadily with his pack secured across his shoulders, the weight familiar, grounding, each step measured not by distance but by instinct. And beside him, Rex moved with quiet purpose, no longer wandering or pausing as he sometimes did, but following a line only he seemed to understand, his ears alert, his pace consistent, as if something ahead was guiding him with a voice too low for human ears to hear. The morning stretched into late afternoon without interruption, the sky opening wide above them, pale blue fading into soft gray clouds that drifted slowly across the horizon, and though the air carried a chill, there was no wind now, only a stillness that made every sound feel sharper. The crunch of gravel beneath boots, the soft rhythm of Rex's breathing, the distant call of a bird circling unseen. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket more than once, his fingers brushing against the metal key, feeling its presence, its quiet insistence, and each time he touched it, the same thought returned, not fully formed, but certain enough to move him forward. This was not just a direction. It was a destination waiting to be recognized. After nearly 6 miles, the road narrowed further, curving gently toward a cluster of old wooden posts that leaned at uneven angles along the side, remnants of a fence that had long since given up its purpose. Beyond them, the land shifted, rising slightly into a line of trees thicker than the ones they had passed before, their branches interwoven in a way that blocked most of the light, casting a soft shadow across the ground beneath. Rex slowed as they approached, his posture tightening just enough to signal a change. He stepped ahead, then stopped at the edge of the tree line. Looking back once, his eyes steady. Waiting, Caleb paused beside him, scanning the space. There was no sign, no marker, nothing to suggest this path led anywhere important. And yet something in the air felt different, quieter, deeper, like the land itself held its breath. He stepped forward, crossing into the shade, and immediately the temperature dropped, not sharply, but enough to be noticed. The scent changed too, less dust, more earth, damp and old, like soil that had not been disturbed in years. Rex moved again, weaving carefully between the trees, his nose low, following something that left no visible trace. Caleb followed without hesitation, his steps slower now, more deliberate, as if he understood that whatever lay ahead was not meant to be rushed. The light dimmed further as the trees thickened, branches forming a loose canopy overhead, and for a while, there was only the path beneath their feet, narrow, uneven, leading deeper into a place that felt untouched by time. Then, after what felt like another mile, the trees began to thin, not abruptly, but gradually, the shadows lifting just enough to reveal a soft glow ahead. Rex picked up his pace, his tail rising slightly, and when they finally stepped beyond the last line of trees, the world opened in a way Caleb had not expected. A wide valley stretched before them, quiet and still, framed by gentle hills on either side, the grass pale and unmoving, as if no wind had passed through it in years. And at the center, barely visible at first, stood the outline of something built, something waiting. Caleb stopped, his breath catching just slightly, not from exhaustion, but from recognition, the kind that comes without explanation. He reached into his pocket once more, pulling out the key, holding it up as the light touched its surface, and for the first time since finding it, he felt not just its weight, but its purpose. And beside him, Rex stood, tall and still, eyes fixed ahead, as if he had finally brought them to the place he had known all along. For a long moment, Caleb did not move, because some places do not ask you to enter, they wait for you to understand that you already have. The valley stretched out before him in a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. No wind moved through the grass. No distant hum of traffic reached this far. Even the sky above seemed quieter, the clouds drifting slower as if time itself had softened within the boundaries of this hidden land. Rex stepped forward first, his paws pressing gently into the pale ground, his body relaxed but focused. The way he moved told Caleb everything he needed to know. This was not a place of danger, but it was not ordinary either. It was something in between, something that listened. Caleb followed, each step measured, his boots sinking slightly into the earth that felt untouched for years. The scent in the air carried a faint trace of cedar and something older, something that reminded him of places long abandoned but never forgotten. As they moved deeper, Into the valley. The structure at its center became clearer, not grand in the way cities build things, but solid, deliberate. A house crafted from stone and timber, its walls weathered but standing strong, its windows dark yet intact, like eyes that had simply been closed for a long time. A narrow path led toward it, barely visible beneath the overgrowth, but still there. Waiting, Caleb noticed the details as he approached. The way the stones had been set with care, the wood beams aged but not broken, the roof holding firm against years of weather without collapse. This place had not been neglected, it had been preserved, as if something had decided it was not yet time for it to fade. Rex slowed near the front of the house, his ears lifting, his head tilting slightly as he listened again to something Caleb could not hear. Then he stepped up onto the porch, the old wood beneath his weight releasing a soft creak that echoed gently across the still air. Caleb followed, his hand instinctively brushing against the wall as he passed, feeling the texture of the stone, cold but steady, real in a way that grounded him. He stopped in front of the door, a heavy wooden frame reinforced with iron bands, worn but strong, and at its center, a lock, simple, old. Waiting, Caleb reached into his pocket, pulling out the key once more, the metal catching the soft light of the valley. And for a moment, everything seemed to pause, the air, the silence, even his own breath, as if the world itself was watching to see what he would do. Rex sat beside him now, calm, his gaze steady, no longer searching, no longer questioning, only present. Caleb lifted the key slowly, aligning it with the lock, and as the metal touched metal, a faint sound passed through the door, not loud, not sudden, but something like a quiet acknowledgement, as if the house itself had recognized the return of something it had been waiting for. Caleb turned the key, feeling the resistance give way with a soft, measured click, and in that small, simple sound, something shifted, not just in the door, but in him. Because this was not just an entrance, it was an answer, and as he pushed the door open, the darkness inside did not feel empty. It felt patient, like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone who would finally understand why it had never truly been alone. The door opened with a slow breath of air that felt untouched by time, not stale, not heavy, but still, as if the space beyond had been waiting in quiet patience rather than abandonment. Caleb stepped inside first, his boots pressing softly against the wooden floor that responded with a low, steady creak, not weak, not broken, just aware, the kind of sound that comes from a place that remembers every step it has ever held. Rex followed closely, his posture alert but calm, his nose lifting slightly as he took in the scent of the interior, a blend of aged wood, faint cedar, and something else beneath it, something almost like warmth lingering long after a fire had gone out. The light from the open doorway stretched across the room in a narrow band, revealing dust suspended in the air, not thick, not neglected, but delicate, like particles that had settled gently over years rather than been forgotten. Caleb's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the shape of the room, a wide main hall with a stone fireplace set against the far wall, its surface clean, not recently used, but not abandoned either. Shelves lined one side of the room, holding objects that seemed untouched but not random, books stacked neatly, a lantern placed with care, a small wooden box resting near the edge as if it had been left there on purpose. Rex moved ahead, his paws silent now, crossing the floor with the same measured confidence he had shown since entering the valley. He paused near the center of the room, his ears lifting as he listened again, then turned his head toward a narrow hallway leading deeper into the house. Caleb followed his gaze, feeling that same quiet pull guiding him forward, not urgency, not fear, but a sense of direction that did not need explanation. He stepped further inside, the floorboards beneath him steady, each movement echoing softly through the stillness. And as he passed the fireplace, his hand brushed lightly against the stone, feeling its cool surface, grounded, real, a reminder that whatever this place was, it was not imagined, it was built, it was lived in, it had a story. The hallway ahead narrowed slightly, the light dimming as the doorway behind him grew smaller. And for a moment, Caleb hesitated, not from doubt, but from awareness, the kind that tells you once you move forward, something will change. Rex did not wait. He stepped into the hallway, his tail low, his focus clear. And that was enough. Caleb followed. The air inside cooler now, carrying a faint echo of something he could not quite name, a memory perhaps, or a presence that lingered just beyond reach. Halfway down the hall, Rex stopped, his body still, his head turning slightly toward a closed door on the right. He did not bark, did not scratch. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. Caleb approached slowly, his hand reaching out toward the handle. The wood smoothed beneath his fingers, worn by use but not time. And as he touched it, a feeling passed through him. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition. Like the quiet understanding that some moments are not accidents. They are arrivals. He turned the handle. Gently, the latch releasing without resistance. And as the door opened, the light from the hallway slipped inside, revealing a small room, simple, ordered, a desk placed beneath a window that let in just enough daylight to soften the shadows. And on that desk, resting alone, was a single envelope, its surface clean, untouched by dust, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Caleb stepped closer, his breath steady, his hand reaching out once more, and before he even opened it, he knew. This was not just a house. This was a message left behind, and somehow, it had always been meant for him. Caleb's fingers hovered over the envelope for a moment longer than necessary, not out of hesitation, but because something in the stillness of that room asked for patience, the kind that honors what came before rather than rushing toward what comes next. Rex stood just behind him, close enough that Caleb could feel the quiet steadiness of his presence, the soft rhythm of breath that had followed him through every uncertain road. And as Caleb finally lifted the envelope from the desk, he noticed. The paper was firm, untouched by age in the way everything else in the house had been shaped by time, as if this single object had been protected, preserved for a purpose that had not yet been fulfilled. The front bore a name, written in careful, deliberate handwriting that carried both strength and age. Caleb Mercer. The sight of it made his chest tighten slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of something too precise to be coincidence. He turned the envelope over slowly, the seal already loosened as though it had never truly been closed, and with a steady breath, he opened it, sliding the folded letter free. The paper inside carried a faint scent, something like cedar and ink, a quiet trace of presence left behind. He unfolded it carefully, the edges crisp beneath his fingers, and began to read. The words did not rush at him. They settled, one line at a time, as if meant to be understood slowly, not just seen. If you are reading this, then you have already done the one thing this place remembers most. You chose to give without asking what you would receive. Caleb's eyes moved across the page, his expression still, but something behind it had begun to shift. The letter continued. This valley does not belong to those who seek it. It reveals itself only to those who do not. And what stands here has waited not for a name, but for a heart that still listens. Rex lowered himself gently to the floor beside the desk, his body relaxed now, no longer searching, no longer alert, only present. As if the purpose that had guided him here was already complete, Caleb swallowed quietly, his hand tightening slightly around the paper as he read the next lines. The man you met did not arrive by chance, and he did not leave without reason. Some doors can only be opened once, and only by those who would open them for others first. Caleb paused, his gaze lifting briefly from the page, the memory of the night returning in fragments, the silence, the fire, the old man's voice, and the way Rex had known before he ever could. He looked down again, continuing. What is here now is yours, not as a reward, but as a continuation. This place does not ask you to stay, only to understand. Kindness does not disappear. It travels, it waits, and sometimes it finds its way home. The final line rested alone at the bottom of the page, simple, unadorned. Welcome to the valley. Caleb lowered the letter slowly, the room around him unchanged, yet somehow different, as if the act of reading had awakened something that had always been there, waiting quietly beneath the surface. He stood still for a long moment, the weight of everything settling not in his hands, but somewhere deeper, somewhere steady. Rex let out a soft breath, his tail brushing lightly against the floor, and for the first time since they had entered the house, the silence did not feel like an absence, it felt like an answer. Caleb folded the letter slowly, not because he was finished with it, but because something inside him understood that its meaning would not end with the final line. It would stay, unfolding in quieter ways over time. He placed it back on the desk with care, aligning it exactly where it had rested before, as if the act of returning it mattered, as if this place noticed small things like that. Rex rose from the floor, stretching lightly before stepping toward the window, his nose lifting as he looked out across the valley. The same stillness remained outside, but now it felt different to Caleb, no longer distant or untouched, but connected, like the land itself had acknowledged his presence. He moved back into the main hall, his footsteps softer now, not from caution, but from a growing respect for the space around him. The shelves he had passed earlier seemed clearer now, each object placed with intention, not decoration, but memory. He paused near the small wooden box, the one resting near the edge of the shelf, and for a moment, he simply looked at it, sensing the same quiet pull that had led him here in the first place. Rex turned from the window and walked over, stopping beside Caleb, his gaze fixed on the box, not tense, not alert, just certain. Caleb reached out and lifted the lid slowly, the hinges releasing with a faint sound that echoed softly in the room. Inside, there was no clutter, no collection of forgotten items, only a single photograph and a folded document beneath it. Caleb picked up the photograph first, holding it carefully between his fingers. The image was old, but clear. A man stood at the center, younger, stronger, but unmistakable. It was the same face he had seen by the fire, the same quiet eyes, only now they carried a lightness that had not been there before. Beside him in the photograph stood another figure, a dog, tall, alert, a German shepherd with a familiar stance, and something about the way it stood, the angle of its ears, the calm strength in its posture, made Caleb glance down instinctively at Rex, who met his gaze with a quiet stillness, as if he understood more than he could ever explain. Caleb turned the photograph over, his fingers tracing the worn edges. A date was written on the back, clear and steady, but what caught his attention was not the date itself. It was how far back it reached, decades before the man he had met should have still been walking any road. Caleb exhaled slowly, not in disbelief, but in recognition, the kind that comes when something impossible feels quietly true. He set the photograph down and unfolded the document beneath it, the paper thicker, official, bearing the markings of something recorded, something intended to last. His eyes moved across the lines, reading carefully, and though the language was formal, the meaning was unmistakable. Ownership transferred, the property, the land, the house, all assigned to him, not through chance, not through claim, but through something written long before he had ever stepped into that valley. Caleb lowered the document slightly, his gaze drifting across the room once more, taking in the walls, the shelves, the quiet presence of everything around him. And for the first time, he did not feel like a visitor. He felt like someone who had arrived. Rex stepped closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against Caleb's leg, grounding him in the moment, and outside, the light shifted just enough to touch the doorway, casting a soft glow across the floor, as if the valley itself had opened one more step, not to reveal something new, but to welcome what had finally come home. Caleb stood in the center of the room a little longer than he realized, the document still resting lightly in his hand, not because he doubted what it said, but because accepting it felt larger than simply understanding the words. Ownership was not what settled into him. It was responsibility, quiet and steady, like the valley itself. He walked slowly toward the doorway, each step measured, as if the house was teaching him how to move within it, not as a stranger, but as someone who now belonged to its silence. Rex followed at his side, his pace calm, no longer searching, no longer guiding, only staying close, the way he always did when something important had already been found. Caleb stepped out onto the porch again, the lights softer now, the afternoon stretching toward evening, the sky above the valley glowing with a muted gold that settled gently across the hills. And for the first time since arriving, he took a full breath without tension. The air felt different here, not lighter, but clearer, as if it carried less weight from the world beyond the trees. He looked out across the land, noticing details he had not seen before, the faint outline of a path winding toward the far edge of the valley, the subtle rise of a hill that sheltered the house from the northern wind, the way the grass bent just slightly in certain places, not from breeze, but from memory of movement long ago. Rex stepped down from the porch and walked a few yards ahead, stopping near a patch of ground where the grass grew a little shorter, his nose lowering briefly before he sat, calm. Watchful, Caleb followed, his boots pressing softly into the earth, and when he reached the spot, he noticed something just beneath the surface, a small marker, almost hidden, worn by time but still standing. He knelt down slowly, brushing away the thin layer of dirt that covered its face, revealing a simple carving, a name, the same letter he had seen etched into the key, M, and beneath it, a date, one that matched the photograph he had found inside. Caleb exhaled quietly, not in sadness, but in understanding, the kind that settles. Without needing explanation, he sat back on his heels for a moment, the world around him still, respectful, as if even the valley acknowledged what rested beneath that small marker. Rex remained beside him, unmoving, his presence steady, grounding, a quiet reminder that he was not alone in this moment. Caleb rose slowly, his gaze lifting once more across the land, and something within him shifted again, not dramatically, not suddenly, but enough to be felt. The road that had carried him for so long no longer felt like the only direction. There was something here now, something rooted, something that did not ask him to keep moving, only to stay, to listen, to continue what had been left unfinished. He turned back toward the house, the document still in his hand, the letter waiting inside, the key now no longer just an object, but a beginning. And as the light dipped lower across the valley, casting long shadows that stretched toward the porch, Caleb stepped forward with a quiet certainty, not because he knew everything that would come next, but because for the first time in a long while, he no longer needed to. The evening settled slowly over the valley, not as a sudden darkness, but as a quiet dimming of light. Like a curtain being drawn with care, Caleb moved back inside the house with a steadiness that felt different from when he first entered, no longer guided by uncertainty, but by a quiet awareness that each step mattered now. Rex followed close behind, his paws soft against the wooden floor, his presence constant and calm. The house greeted them not with sound, but with a subtle shift in atmosphere. As if it recognized that something had changed, Caleb set the document gently on the table near the fireplace, placing it beside the lantern that had remained untouched for so long. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the cool metal, and after a brief moment, he struck a small match from his kit, the flame flickering to life with a soft hiss. He held it steady as he lit the wick, and the lantern responded with a warm glow that spread slowly across the room, pushing back the shadows not with force, but with quiet persistence. The light revealed more than just the space. It revealed intention, the careful placement of each object, the way the room had been left not in abandonment, but in expectation. Rex settled near the hearth, his body lowering to the floor with a soft exhale, his eyes half closed but still aware, as if his role had shifted from guiding to watching over what had been found. Caleb moved through the house with unhurried steps, opening doors, not searching, but learning. Each room offered something small but meaningful, a chair placed near a window that faced the hills, a shelf lined with books whose pages had not been disturbed but did not feel forgotten, a kitchen where utensils rested in order, ready to be used again. Nothing felt broken. Nothing felt lost. It all felt paused, waiting for someone to continue what had once been lived here. He returned to the main room, standing near the fireplace as the lantern light danced softly across the stone, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the absence of noise not as emptiness, but as peace, the kind that does not demand anything, only offers space to exist. Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears turning toward the door as a faint sound moved through the valley, not loud, not sudden, just a gentle shift, like the wind remembering how to move again. Caleb turned as well, his gaze settling on the doorway, the light from outside now dim, the horizon fading into soft shadows, and for a brief moment, he thought of the old man, not as a question, not as a mystery, but as a presence that had fulfilled its purpose. He stepped closer to the door, looking out across the valley once more, the land still, the air calm, and though nothing visible had changed, something felt complete, as if a circle had quietly closed. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him with a soft, steady motion, the sound echoing gently through the house. not as an end, but as a beginning. Rex lowered his head again, resting fully now, his breathing slow and even, and Caleb stood there in the warm glow of the lantern, no longer a man passing through, but someone who had been given a place to remain, not by chance, but by something that had been waiting long before he ever arrived. The night deepened around the house, not with heaviness, but with a calm that felt earned, as if the valley itself had settled into a quiet agreement with everything inside it. Caleb remained by the fireplace for a while, watching the lantern light flicker against the stone, the soft glow shifting with each small movement of the flame. And in that gentle rhythm, something within him began to loosen, the tension that had followed him for years, carried through long roads and silent nights. No longer pressed so tightly against his chest, Rex slept nearby, his breathing steady, his body fully at rest in a way Caleb had not seen in a long time, as if the dog, too, understood that whatever they had been searching for had finally been found. Caleb moved slowly through the room, not out of uncertainty, but out of respect, each step measured, each touch deliberate. He added a few small pieces of wood to the fireplace, striking another match and coaxing a quiet flame to life. The fire responded gradually, its warmth spreading through the room, not overwhelming, but steady, grounding, and for a moment, Caleb simply stood there, feeling the heat against his hands, watching the light grow stronger. It had been a long time since he had built a fire that was not meant to be temporary, not meant to fade before morning. This one felt different, like it belonged here, like it would be there when he woke. He turned toward the window, the glass reflecting the soft glow behind him, and beyond it, the valley rested under a blanket of stars, clear and undisturbed, the sky stretching wide without the interference of distant lights, each star sharp and steady, as if the world above mirrored the quiet certainty below. Caleb stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against the frame, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel something he had not allowed in a long time. Not relief, not even hope, but something quieter, something that did not demand anything in return, belonging. It did not arrive loudly. It did not announce itself. It simply settled, like the light in the room, like the stillness in the valley, like the presence of the dog sleeping at his side. Rex stirred slightly, shifting his position before settling again, his tail giving a small, slow movement against the floor. Caleb glanced back, a faint smile touching the edge of his expression, not wide, not forced, just real, the kind that comes without effort when something inside has finally eased. He walked back to the table, picking up the letter once more, reading the final line again, not because he needed to, but because it felt different now, clearer, as if its meaning had grown with each step he had taken. He folded it carefully and placed it near the lantern, within reach, not hidden, not stored away, but present, a reminder, not of what he had been given, but of why. The fire crackled softly behind him, the sound gentle, consistent, filling the space without overwhelming it. And as the night moved quietly forward, Caleb found a place near the hearth, sitting down with his back against the wall, his body finally allowing itself to rest fully, not the kind of rest that comes from exhaustion, but the kind that comes when there is nowhere else you need to go. And in that still moment, with the fire warm, the stars steady, and the valley holding its quiet watch, Caleb closed his eyes, not to escape the world, but to remain within it, exactly where he was meant to be. Morning arrived gently, not with urgency, but with a quiet unfolding of light that slipped through the windows and settled across the wooden floor, touching the edges of the room, as if it had always known where to go. Caleb stirred slowly, his eyes opening to the soft glow of a new day. And for a moment, he remained still, not out of habit, but because there was no longer a need to rush. The fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving behind a steady warmth that lingered in the air, not fading, not gone, just present, like everything else in this place. Rex lifted his head as Caleb moved, his eyes calm, his body relaxed, and when their gazes met, there was no question in them, only recognition, as if both understood that something had changed during the night, something quiet but lasting. Caleb pushed himself up slowly, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders, but even that felt different now, lighter, as though the weight he had carried for so long had shifted into something steadier, something he could hold without strain. He stepped toward the window, the view beyond it clear and wide, the valley resting under the morning light, the hills outlined in soft gold, the grass unmoving yet alive in its stillness. And for the first time, he did not look at the horizon as something distant, something to chase. He looked at it as something that belonged to where he stood. Rex rose and walked beside him, his shoulder brushing lightly against Caleb's leg, grounding him in. The moment, the house behind them remained quiet, not empty, but complete, every corner filled with a sense of presence that did not need to be seen to be understood. Caleb turned away from the window and moved through the room with steady purpose, not searching, not exploring, but beginning. He gathered a few pieces of wood and placed them carefully in the hearth, coaxing the fire back to life with patient hands, the flame rising slowly, steady and warm, and as it grew, it did not feel like something new. It felt like a continuation, like a story that had never truly ended, only waited. Rex settled near the doorway, his gaze drifting between Caleb and the valley beyond, calm and watchful, not leading anymore, but staying, the way only something truly loyal can. Caleb glanced once more at the letter resting beside the lantern, its presence quiet but constant, and though he did not pick it up again, he did not need to. Its meaning had already settled into him, not as words, but as something deeper, something lived rather than read. He stepped outside, the morning air cool against his skin, carrying a faint scent of earth and cedar. The valley stretched before him, unchanged yet somehow different, as if it had opened itself just a little more, not to reveal something hidden, but to welcome what had finally arrived. Caleb stood there for a long moment, not thinking about where he had been or where he might go, but simply standing, present, the kind of stillness that does not come from stopping, but from arriving. Rex joined him at his side, his posture relaxed, his breathing slow and even, and together, they looked out across the land that had waited, not for a name, not for a claim, but for a choice. And in that quiet morning light, with the house behind them and the valley before them, Caleb understood something that could not be written in any letter, that sometimes the road does not lead you to where you are meant to be. It leads you to the moment when you are finally ready to stay, and perhaps that is where everything truly begins.